Welcome, friends. Tonight we're setting off on a soft, slightly ridiculous journey into the powdered, plucked, and perfumed world of medieval European beauty standards. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. So, settle in, fluff your pillow, maybe light a candle. Let's dim the lights and take a deep, relaxing breath as we uncover why looking like a slightly haunted porcelain doll was once considered the height of beauty. Let's begin with the cornerstone of medieval aesthetics: pale skin. Back then, looking pale wasn't just a sign that you needed to go outside. It was a full-on social flex. A complexion like moonlight through fog wasn't just pretty. It screamed, "I'm rich enough to never work in the sun, thank you very much." And when we say pale, we don't mean a nice, healthy cream. No, we're talking ghost at your window pale. The ideal noblewoman looked like she hadn't seen the sun since last Lent, or perhaps had recently seen a ghost and was still recovering. So, how did they achieve this glow? White lead powder is the answer. Yes, lead. The same stuff we now remove from paint and drinking water. Noble ladies, and occasionally men, would dust their faces with this toxic snow to achieve that flawless, corpse-like finish. It was all the rage. And the slow poisoning? Well, that was just a price you paid for beauty. But lead wasn't the only trick in the box. Vinegar-soaked cloths, egg whites, crushed pearls, all applied in the hope of turning their complexions into something fit for a marble statue. Some even painted blue veins onto their skin to add a touch of aristocratic fragility. Because what's more elegant than looking like your skin might shatter from a light breeze? Now, let's float gently over to the high forehead phenomenon. In the 14th and 15th centuries, a tall forehead wasn't just desirable, it was divine. A high, smooth, empty expanse of forehead suggested intelligence, grace, and a life free of shovels. And to create this five-head of glory, eyebrows had to go. Yes, the brows were banished, plucked into oblivion. Women tweezed them, scraped them, or applied terrifying concoctions made from cat dung, vinegar, and leeches, all in the pursuit of that uninterrupted dome of dignity. And the hairline? Also up for negotiation. Some women removed the first inch or two of hair to create more real estate for forehead admiration. It was the architectural marvel of the medieval face. Combine this with a hen-in-that-cone-shaped hat that could poke an eye out at court, and you had a full look that said, "Yes, I'm elegant. Yes, I might be levitating." Here's a fun historical aside. Richard I of England, yes, Richard the Lionheart was described as tall, handsome, and fair-haired, the kind of noble appearance that ticked every medieval beauty checkbox. Chroniclers often emphasized his height, golden hair, and radiant complexion qualities linked with divine favor and leadership. Even for men, appearance mattered, especially when it reflected noble lineage and heroic stature. But he wasn't alone. Let's look at a few more recognizable medieval figures whose looks mattered almost as much as their swords. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and well-travelled queens of the time, was celebrated for her elegance and poise. Described as beautiful and intelligent, her court was a hotspot for poetry, chivalry, and style, especially that refined, high-born grace. Philip IV of France, nicknamed Philip the Fair because of his striking appearance. Tall, blond, and blue-eyed, he was the poster king for what Northern European beauty idealized in a monarch. Isabella of France, daughter of Philip IV, and known as the she-wolf of France, was described as exceptionally beautiful and cunning. Chroniclers praised her pale skin and delicate features, which naturally matched her icy political instincts. And even Edward IV of England was called the handsomest man in the kingdom. With broad shoulders, long legs, and golden hair, he embodied the knightly dreamboat aesthetic of late medieval England. These were people who didn't just rule, they radiated the kind of allure that poets, painters, and power-hungry nobles admired and feared in equal measure. Now, don't worry, colour wasn't totally banned. Rouge was allowed, but only just. The cheeks were allowed a gentle blush, as if you'd just heard a mildly naughty poem, or had been complimented on your embroidery. But apply it too boldly, and you were teetering on the edge of sin. After all, vanity was frowned upon, unless you were nobility. Then it was spiritually ambiguous. Women used beetroot, strawberries, and occasionally crushed insects to get that perfect pink hue. And if the clergy raised an eyebrow, well, good thing you didn't have any. Let's drift now to the hair. Ah, yes. Hair. That golden halo of holiness. Blonde was the pinnacle. Virgin Mary herself was often painted as a blonde, despite geographical reality. Because nothing says holiness like a hair colour that makes you look like you've been sunbathing in Italy. Let's consider Agnes Sorel, famously known as the first official mistress of a French king, Charles VII. Her influence was so powerful, she practically dictated court fashion. With her long golden hair, often styled loose or in intricate braids, she became a living symbol of courtly allure. Her hair was admired, imitated, and illustrated in paintings as a symbol of elegance. Her portraits often show her with exposed golden hair and elegant gowns, emphasizing the fashionable beauty of the time. Not naturally blonde? No problem. Medieval women had an entire apothecary's worth of potions at their disposal: saffron, chamomile, ash, honey, and yes, even urine. Whose urine? Unclear. Possibly just whoever was around and willing to contribute to the cause of celestial shine. Hair texture mattered too. Loose, wavy locks cascading down your back like a divine waterfall. Gorgeous, if you were unmarried. The moment you said, "I do," your hair was legally required to vanish behind a modesty veil faster than you could say, "matrimony." Thus began the era of the medieval hair burrito. Hair was twisted, braided, tucked, and bound beneath layers of fabric, wimples, veils, nets, and hennins, tall enough to catch the breeze from passing birds. These weren't just fashion statements, they were signals. A glimpse of uncovered hair on a married woman? Scandalous. Practically revolutionary. Maybe even French. Moving downward now, let's talk about body ideals. One royal example was Anne of Bohemia, queen to Richard II. Though slightly outside the high medieval period, she was praised for her slim, graceful frame, fitting the delicate, willowy ideal of noble beauty. Artists often portrayed her with long limbs, slender waists, and gentle postures, emphasizing both elegance and a noble air. Forget the modern obsession with gym routines and protein powders. Medieval beauty was about being faintly poetic, faintly fragile, and just faint enough to suggest you had no chores. The goal is a soft, willowy figure. Think someone who dines on fruit, prayer, and mild melancholy. You wanted to appear like you could recite psalms and then swoon at the beauty of a daisy. Waists were cinched just below the bust in empire-style gowns. It gave the illusion of height, grace, and an otherworldly constitution. Not too thin, mind you. Then people assumed you were dying, but just fragile enough to suggest you might sigh dramatically by a window and mean it. Now, the eyes. Take Joan of Valois, daughter of Charles VII. Chroniclers didn't just note her piety, they noted her eyes. Described as deep-set, glistening with emotion, and filled with an almost saintly sadness, they gave her an aura of quiet mystique. Portraits of her often highlight her gaze, soft and searching, like she held some divine truth. Eyes were a big deal. They were your medieval emojis, expressing innocence, piety, and maybe a dash of tragic yearning. Ideally, they were wide, watery, and luminous, as if you'd just witnessed a miracle or read a particularly moving verse about divine justice. Women sometimes dabbed soot or charcoal around the lashes to enlarge the eyes, but subtly. Too much, and you'd risk being compared to a morally questionable troubadour. Tearfulness was actually admired. It suggested emotional depth. If you couldn't cry on cue, just stare into smoke or endure mild embarrassment worked like a charm. As for eye contact, it was a careful dance. Too much, and you were considered brazen. Too little, and you might be hiding something, or worse, uninteresting. The perfect look, a soft glance from beneath lowered lashes. Bonus points if it looked like you'd recently seen a vision of St. Cecilia. Next, let's explore the world of breath, teeth, and scent, because beauty isn't just what you see, it's what you smell, or hope not to. Let's begin with breath, an often underappreciated facet of medieval charm. Even noble figures have their reputations influenced by their hygiene, or lack thereof. Take Queen Elizabeth of Hungary, who was known for her piety and cleanliness. Though she lived in the early 13th century, chroniclers praised her for maintaining sweet breath with herbal mixtures and being fond of washing with rosewater. Her association with floral freshness only enhanced her saintly image, eventually contributing to her canonization. On the other end of the spectrum, King James I of Scotland was said to be obsessively concerned with cleanliness, reportedly rinsing his mouth with wine and chewing on cloves before council meetings. In his case, sweet breath became part of his courtly charm and political poise. Even in the grim realities of medieval hygiene, fragrant breath could elevate your status. People in the Middle Ages didn't brush their teeth with minty toothpaste or floss while checking their reflection in polished mirrors. Yet fresh breath, or at least non-lethal breath, was still considered important, especially among the noble classes. Cloves, cinnamon sticks, and parsley were chewed not just to freshen the breath, but to project an air of cultivated herbal mystery. Imagine whispering court secrets scented with spice rather than onions and mutton. Toothpaste? Think powdered chalk mixed with sage. Toothbrushes? More like a cloth rubbed across the teeth or twigs with frayed ends. It didn't always help, but it was the effort that counted. Teeth were not often shown in portraits, partly because smiling with teeth was not fashionable. A wide grin was seen as unsophisticated, even foolish. Think Mona Lisa, not a toothpaste commercial. One rare example of exceptional dental care comes from Isabella of Castile, who reportedly used herbal tooth powders and took great care with her appearance. Chroniclers marveled at her dignity and neatness, noting how her presence was as commanding as it was graceful. It's no coincidence her marriage helped unify Spain. Politics and polished appearances often went hand in hand. Tooth decay, while common, was managed with herbal rinses and sometimes horrifying medieval dentistry involving pliers and prayer. A lady's beauty might rely more on the mystery of her lips than what lay behind them. Now to scent, arguably the most underestimated battlefield of beauty. Let's bring in a few noble noses for inspiration. One famed example is Catherine de' Medici, the Italian-born Queen of France. She adored perfumes and popularized the use of personal scent among French nobility. She even had her own perfumer, René Le Florentine, who created signature blends using musk, rose, and orange blossom. Her scent was so iconic, it was said you could tell Catherine was coming long before she entered a room. On the other side of the gendered scented aisle, we have King Henry IV of France, known not only for his charm and charisma, but also for being unusually obsessed with cleanliness and scent. By medieval standards, of course. While his personal hygiene was debatable, he adored strong perfumes and was often gifted pomanders and aromatic oils to ensure his presence left a pleasing trace in the room. With bathing happening infrequently, sometimes only a few times a year, managing scent was less about removing body odor and more about masking it elegantly. Enter pomanders. Pomanders were small, often ornate metal spheres filled with herbs, spices, and resins. Women would carry them on belts or keep them in their sleeves, a subtle waft of lavender or clove trailing behind them like a scented signature. Other methods included soaking linen undergarments in floral water, dabbing rose oil behind the ears, and sleeping with herbs under pillows. One had to get creative when the nearest bathhouse was 2 villages away and the water had to be heated by fire. The idea wasn't to smell clean, it was to smell divine. Like roses, or holy incense, or something that could be found in the margins of a very fragrant prayer book. But woe to those who did not, or could not, conform. Women of darker complexion, peasants unable to afford perfumed accessories, or those who simply aged outside the ideal, found themselves marginalized. Beauty was a currency, and to be outside the accepted norms was to risk invisibility, ridicule, or worse, assumptions about your morality or virtue. Take a moment to appreciate how far we've come, and how far some people were willing to go. Before we extinguish the final candle, let's explore one last, shimmering layer of medieval beauty. Fashion as a mirror of elegance. In the Middle Ages, what you wore wasn't just about staying warm or keeping decent. It was a full-body announcement of your class, your values, and your desirability. Beauty and fashion were inseparable allies. Noble women wore gowns with long, trailing sleeves that swept across the floor, a sure sign you weren't doing any housework. These sleeves weren't just fabric, they were status banners. Headdresses could tower a foot above your scalp, weighing nearly as much as a cat, and still be considered modest, as long as your hair stayed hidden beneath it. Brocades, velvet, and embroidered silks weren't just luxurious, they were legally restricted to the upper classes. Sumptuary laws ensured that you couldn't just dress above your station. Only the nobility could wear certain colours or fabrics. Deep blue, that was royalty. Crimson, reserved. Ermine fur, don't even think about it unless you had land and a title. Accessories mattered just as much. Belts, girdles, gloves, jewelled headbands, each element was a cue. The finer the detail, the more refined you were thought to be. Even shoes had messages. Long, pointed shoes called poulaines were so elongated they sometimes needed to be tied to the knee to keep from tripping. Dangerous? Yes. Fashionable? Also yes. Men weren't exempt. A high-born man in a well-fitted cotardi or fur-lined cloak might be seen as not just powerful, but worthy of romantic poetry. Just as women's waists were accentuated, so were men's shoulders and calves, signs of strength and grace. And woe to the man with the wrinkled hose. Fashion shaped the silhouette of beauty. The Gothic body was long, vertical and fluid, like a candle flame. Tall headdresses, fitted bodices, flowing lines. Beauty was linear, graceful, sculptural. And beauty was performance. To walk through a court wearing velvet so heavy it could smother a stable boy was to declare, I am both wealthy and lovely, and also I sit down a lot. So, as we draw the curtains on this velvet-draped bedtime tale, remember, medieval beauty wasn't just about cheekbones or eyelashes. It was posture, presentation, poise in silk. A day in the mirror, a noblewoman's morning in medieval elegance. The morning sun filters through stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patches of light across the stone walls of a wealthy noblewoman's chamber. The room is high-ceilinged and quiet, its air scented faintly with lavender and dried rosemary. Tapestries of saints and unicorns hang beside a carved wooden bed, where thick velvet curtains are drawn open by a yawning lady's maid. The noblewoman stirs gently, rising with the grace expected of her station. Her name might be Lady Isabeau or Eleanor, names befitting her lineage. Her day begins not with toil, but with ritual. Servants enter the chamber in hushed reverence. A young girl fetches the floral water that's steeped overnight, rose, sage, and mint, and offers it in a silver basin for her mistress to wash her face and hands. Another maid arrives with linens and a warm cloth. The lady's hair is untied and brushed, long, golden, and softened with chamomile rinses. They brush it 100 times, not for science, but for symbolism. To be brushed, to be tended to, was a sign of status, and the hair must fall like silken threads by the time it is braided and veiled. Cosmetics follow. Her face is gently patted with cloths soaked in vinegar and milk. A thin layer of white lead powder is applied delicately to her cheeks, nose, and forehead. Then, using crushed rose petals and powdered cochineal, a light rouge is added to her cheeks. Blue veins are painted with a brush just beneath her skin to enhance her noble fragility. Her lips are tinted faintly with strawberry juice. Her brows, gone as expected. A dab of soot to the lashes frames her tearful, pious eyes. A mirror, polished silver, is held up as she inspects the result, ethereal, pale, and graceful, as the church would approve. Now comes the gown. Layers of undergarments, linen chemises, and corseted support are wrapped and tied. Her dress is velvet, deep green with gold trim, long in sleeve and hem. It is too heavy to walk in unaided. Shoes with pointed toes, almost comical in length, are slipped onto her feet. A girdle set with pearls is fastened at her waist. Her head is crowned with a hennin, and beneath it her hair is concealed. She looks divine. That is the point. Her beauty is not simply a matter of taste. It is proof of her virtue, her wealth, her belonging. And when she enters the great hall later that day, trailing scent and silence, everyone will know who she is long before she speaks. A nobleman's morning. Refinement, ritual, and courtly composure. The chamber of a nobleman, Sir Alaric perhaps, awakens in the early hush before the bell tolls for morning prayers. His quarters are panelled in dark oak, lined with tapestries of heraldic beasts, and warmed by the glow of a small hearth. The scent of beeswax polish and freshly ground cloves fills the air, carried in from the hands of servants who entered moments before. Sir Alaric stirs from his heavy bed of embroidered linen and wool. No sooner does he rise than his attendants begin their duties. One lays out his garments, an undertunic of fine linen, a richly dyed cotardi, trimmed with fur. and hose so well stitched they hold the line of his leg like a sculptor's mould. He washes his face in cold rosewater and wine, rubbed gently with cloths soaked in sage. A polished bronze mirror reflects a man not merely grooming but constructing a daily portrait. His beard is trimmed close and neat. Too much wildness is for poets, not courtiers. His golden hair is combed and smoothed with oil infused with rosemary. He dabs cloves between his molars and rinses with diluted wine to freshen his breath. No one would say it aloud, but in court, a man's scent preceded his favour. If he speaks to the Queen's adviser, it must be with clarity, composure, and a fragrant whisper of status. His boots are pulled up and fastened, his cloak draped over his shoulders by 2 pages. A jewelled belt encircles his waist. He inspects his gloved hands, clean, manicured, the nails scraped and buffed by a quiet valet. Finally, he selects a ring, heavy, gold, with a family crest, the kind of touch that says, "I was born to be listened to." When Sir Alaric walks the stone halls toward the chapel or the council, he does so with measured stride and serene eyes. His appearance is not only a reflection of beauty, it is an instrument of power, influence, and noble expectation. A courtly ball. Midnight murmurs and mirror games. The hall is lit with 1,000 flickering candles, suspended from chandeliers of hammered brass. Sconces throw soft shadows on walls, draped in velvet banners bearing crests of noble houses. Beneath the high vaulted ceiling, the scent of clove-studded oranges and honeyed wine drifts through the warm air, mingling with the wax and perfume of dozens of carefully adorned nobles. It is the feast of St. Agnes, and tonight the castle hosts a winter ball unlike any other. The air buzzes with courtly anticipation. Over 40 servants scurry in the background, fanning braziers, carrying silver trays of pomegranate-stuffed quail, and keeping goblets filled to the brim. Lady Mary descends the staircase as if born of moonlight. Her gown is silk, embroidered with golden thread, and trimmed with ermine. Her hair is veiled beneath a hennin, her cheeks a perfect blush of cochineal. The other noble women eye her from behind their own veils. Lady Cecily whispers to Lady Marguerite, "Do you think her cheek colour is too bold? Perhaps she's fishing for a second husband already." Mary smiles, not because she hears, but because she knows. In the game of beauty, admiration and jealousy wear the same face. Across the room, a circle of young noblemen pause in their talk of hunting. One of them, Sir Etienne, a baron's son with sun-brushed hair and a cloak lined in wolf fur, stares a moment too long. The others glance between him and Mary, then chuckle knowingly. Sir Etienne approaches, bowing low before her. "My lady, may I claim your hand for the next pavan?" Mary accepts with a tilt of her head, her gloved fingers ghosting into his palm. The music begins, flutes, viols, and a distant tambourine, and they circle, bow, and glide in stately rhythm. They do not speak at first, but the silence between them hums with meaning. After the dance, Sir Etienne does not disappear. He lingers at her side, offering her a candied violet and complimenting the scent of her rosewater. She laughs quietly, then says she made the rosewater herself, which is a lie, but it's the right sort of lie. Later, they exchange favours. She offers him a ribbon from her girdle, and he promises a verse of poetry by week's end. In the strict politeness of court, these tokens mean everything. As the evening deepens, Sir Etienne escorts Mary to a quieter corner of the gallery, away from the swirling dancers. They speak softly, of music, falconry, and the latest troubadour's verses, as any pair of courtly souls might. The air between them feels charged, yet laced with propriety. A servant passes with a tray of sugared plums, which Etienne offers Mary with an open palm, their gloved fingers brushing just slightly. She blushes, not from the sweets, but from the closeness. They agree to meet again during the hunt planned for the following week. Nothing improper, of course, a ride under watchful eyes. But in a world where everything meaningful is whispered, this promise feels bold. Mary presses a small sprig of rosemary into his hand before she leaves, a symbol of remembrance. As she rejoins her companions, the other ladies raise their brows. "The Baron's son, Mary?" Lady Marguerite murmurs. Mary simply sips her wine and smiles over the rim of her goblet. The game has just begun. Sir Etienne, meanwhile, watches her from across the room, already thinking of how he'll phrase his verse. His gaze lingers not on her gown nor her hennin, but on the way she moved through the dance, poised, pale, and impossible to forget. Behavior standards and social expectations tied to beauty. Take, for instance, Christine de Pizan, the medieval poet and philosopher. She not only embodied the ideal of courtly femininity in her appearance, but also maintained an impeccable reputation through grace, humility, and polished speech. Her intellect was wrapped in politeness, and her presence at court was both admired and expected. On the other hand, Sir Thomas Malory, author of the Le Morte d'Arthur, portrays knights like Sir Galahad as not only the most handsome, but also the most pure, devout, and well-mannered. Galahad's beauty was matched by his chaste conduct and noble demeanour. He didn't just slay dragons, he also prayed beautifully afterward. Even Joan of Arc, though famous for donning armour, was noted for her composed, devout demeanour. Chroniclers often pointed out that while she abandoned traditional feminine clothing, she behaved with the piety and restraint that aligned her with idealized feminine virtue, even as she broke every mold. In the medieval world, beauty wasn't just about appearance, it came with a set of expected behaviors. A beautiful woman, especially one of noble birth, was also expected to behave in accordance with her perceived refinement. Her gestures were to be soft, her speech humble, her movements graceful and slow. If her beauty was angelic, then so too must be her behavior. To laugh too loudly, to stride instead of glide, to speak with assertiveness, these were often seen as jarring, disruptive, even unbecoming. A well-bred woman was to be modest, pious, and serene. Beauty and virtue were intertwined, and failing in one could tarnish the other. Smiling too broadly could imply wantonness. Making direct eye contact might suggest immodesty. Everything from posture to pacing to posture at dinner was scrutinized. After all, what good was a perfect complexion if it was paired with rude table manners? Men, too, had their own behavioral beauty codes. A handsome knight was not simply strong or chiseled. He was chivalrous, eloquent, and restrained. Bravado was to be tempered with courtesy. A truly attractive man displayed noble restraint, poetic expression, and moral courage, especially in front of ladies or the church. Male beauty was therefore measured in grace as much as in jawline. Those who did not or could not fit these molds often found themselves mocked, mistrusted, or excluded. The awkward girl, the unshaven peasant, the loud merchant, all were judged not just for how they looked, but for how they moved, spoke, and lived. In many ways, behaviour was the invisible frame around one's visible beauty, and stepping outside that frame came at a cost. Before we close, let's explore a few final threads in the medieval tapestry of beauty: myths, religion, and the reality of aging. Medieval beauty, myths, remedies, and superstitions. One remedy for wrinkles involved placing raw meat on the face overnight. Not only was this thought to hydrate the skin, but it also served the dual purpose of attracting cats, which some believed absorbed evil spirits through their purring. Superstitions also held that if you bathed on a Friday during Lent, your beauty would fade before Easter, a risk few dared take. The role of religion in shaping beauty norms. Religion did not only influence how beauty was depicted, it also determined who was allowed to be considered beautiful. Fair skin and golden hair became more than social signals. They were seen as marks of divine favour. The Virgin Mary, frequently painted with a halo of light hair and serene features, became the blueprint of female sanctity and beauty. This iconography bled into court culture, encouraging women to emulate her look as a symbol of spiritual worth. In monasteries and convents, modesty was praised, and any form of adornment could be deemed sinful. Yet even within these walls there was often an unspoken appreciation for symmetry, cleanliness, and composure. Nuns, while stripped of worldly beauty rituals, were still expected to uphold an ideal of quiet grace, beauty through denial, not embellishment. For men, saints like Saint Sebastian, often depicted youthful and beautiful even in martyrdom, reinforced the idea that inner virtue could shine through physical form. Religious texts and sermons warned against vanity, yet rewarded those who embodied godly beauty, a form of radiance that came from both moral purity and pleasing appearance. Inner beauty was praised in sermons, yet external beauty was still a powerful force in religious imagery. Virgin Mary was the ideal, modest, pale, soft-spoken, and always clothed in flowing blue robes. To imitate this sacred beauty was not vanity, it was piety. And so, noble women walked a fine line, beautifying themselves just enough to resemble saints, but never enough to be accused of seduction. Meanwhile, clergy often criticized heavy makeup or luxurious dress, unless it appeared on a stained glass window, beauty and aging in the Middle Ages. There were potions for grey hair, usually ash or iron oxide based, and balms to reduce wrinkles. Some used masks made from rose petals and honey, worn overnight. Others swore by warm goat's milk baths, which might have helped, but only if you owned a goat and a tub big enough to soak in. Yet despite the challenges, aging gracefully did have its own kind of respect. Widows and matriarchs were often seen as wise, cloaked in dignity. Some, like Eleanor of Aquitaine, maintained beauty and influence well into older age. Descriptions of her in her later years still note her regal bearing, her composed elegance, a reminder that beauty could transcend youth. And with that, dear listener, we gently close the final page of tonight's journey through beauty's strange, scented, and shimmering past. Whether you now dream of silken gowns or scented pomanders, may your sleep be sweet and your imagination soft as velvet. Thank you for joining us. Rest well. Take care of your beautiful self, whatever that means to you. And until next time, good night.